Sechus Gittin Daf begins immediately following a Mishnah and contains 3 additional Mishnayos, all on the topic of what happens if a person who is sick or dying or healthy but tries to use the function of a person who's sick or dying, orders to give a get to his wife with various different variations as to what he said and how it could take effect. So let's begin. The Gemara has just brought a Mishnah which said that even though he didn't say give the get, he just said write the get. We assume he meant give, and he didn't say it because of his mental confusion because he's about to die. And the Gemara now wants to say, how does that compare to if he says to give a gift, but he doesn't do a kinyan to give a gift? Usually if a man orders a gift from his property to be given to someone else, he has to actually do a kinyan to transfer possession, at least if he didn't do the kinyan before he dies, then he hasn't transferred possession. He now no longer owns the property because it was transferred to his inheritors. How can you give the gift afterwards? So the Gemara will discuss, can you learn from our Mishnah that he had mental preoccupation and therefore he failed to say give the get, that he also here had mental preoccupation, failed to do the kinyan, but he really meant to, and it's a manish chevmeira, and you should give it. So the Gemara explores this point with the story of Geniva. Again, Geniva has been mentioned in the Masechta a number of times. And he was a Talmid Chacham, but he started up with people, and he ended up being killed by the government. So the Gemara says now that just before he was killed, he said, give the 400 zuz from my wine in Nahar Panya, give that to Rabbi Avina. So this is what he said. That's the exact words. So the Gemara wants to know, he just said give the wine, he didn't do kinyan, then he died, should we give the wine to Rabbi Avina or not? So Gemara says Rabbi Zera said as follows. Rabbi Zera said Rabbi Avina should take his basket of food on his shoulder, meaning get ready to travel, and go on a trip to Rav Huna. Rav Huna was his Rebbe, because with Rav Huna's halacha, he will be zayche to the 400 zuz. What's Rav Huna's halacha? So Rav Huna had said that the halacha of a get and the halacha of a matana are the same. And therefore, just like in the case of the get, you would give the get even though he didn't say give, he just said write because of the tirda that he had that he's about to die. The same thing would apply in a matana, and you can give him the matana even though he died already and he didn't do a kinyan. Now, Rav Huna wasn't talking about that. Rav Huna was saying there's another similarity, another connection between the get and matana. Rabbi Zera is the one who's saying that it applies to all halachos of get and matana. What was Rav Huna referring to? So Rav Huna had said that if you had a person who was sick and he thought he was about to die, and he said to give a get, and then he had a miraculous recovery, then you don't give the get. He has a right to retract, even though officially we would give the get on the spot, but since he recovered, he has a right to retract. Same thing applies to a matana. If he said to give a matana and then had a miraculous recovery, and he wants to undo the gift, he has a right to undo that as well. Now, okay, so therefore, Rabbi Zera wanted to learn from get matana. So the Gemara says that Rabbi Abba asked a kasha on this. And now we have some trouble figuring out what Rabbi Abba's kasha is exactly. We have 3 different versions as to what the kasha is. The first version is that Rabbi Abba says as follows. According to Rabbi Zera, you could learn the halachas of following the instructions of a dying person from get to matana, and apparently vice versa. So Gemara says, but then if that's true, Rabbi Zera asks, Rabbi Abba asks, that is, you should be able to learn that just like you can give a gift after the death of the person, you should be able to give the get after the death of the person. That's obviously not true. After the person had died, his wife, you can't give a get anymore. She's not married anymore. She's not almana now. So obviously you can't compare everything from get to matana. So who says you can compare all these halachas that you want to do? So says that's not a kasha. The reason you can't learn from matana to get that you can give it after he dies is because there's no such concept as a get after the death. She's not married anymore, like you said. So that's not a kasha on you being able to learn the things which are relevant from get to matana and vice versa. So the verse says you're right, that wasn't Rabbi Abba's kasha. Rabbi Abba had a different kasha. His kasha was that this is what's called a manash chivmeira b'mixas. The rule is that we automatically give the gift of a dying person, but that's only if he gives away all his property, because we assume that he's doing that because he's dying. He knows that it's the end of his life, and he wants to give everything away. Here he's only giving some things away, and he's keeping some things for himself. That sounds like he doesn't think he's about to die. He doesn't realize that he's dying, or he's not acting because of his impending death. So here he's only giving away 400 zuz. So why should we live? Why should we listen to him and make adjustments and allowances if he didn't do it properly? So the Gemara says, okay, that's a good kasha. It's such a good kasha. There's a possible that Rabbi Zera argues. We know that that's explicit halacha. If somebody gives part of his gift, it's not a manas shchiv mirah, doesn't have those halachos. So the Gemara says, no, it's different where he's literally about to die for sure. And we know that there it's different. Here, he's about to be killed. There's no reprieve. He knows he's literally about to die, and therefore it's certainly because of his impending death, even though he only gives away part of his things. So the Gemara says that's a valid point. As a matter of fact, how could Rabbi Abba even ask the kasha? That's a clear halacha. So the Gemara therefore says, so that's not the correct version of Rabbi Abba's kasha. Rabbi Abba was really asking something else. Rabbi Abba was asking, how could you do it over here? How could you give the gift of the wine? He didn't say anything meaningful. He didn't say give wine, and he didn't say give the value of the wine, meaning sell the wine and give the value of the wine. He said, give 400 zuz from the wine. Go look in the wine. You're not going to find 400 zuz there. How am I supposed to give 400 zuz from the wine? It's improperly spoken, and you shouldn't do anything with that. So the Gemara says, so the answer is that we assume he said that in order to increase the power of the person receiving the gift. They should receive the gift. All the wine should be responsible, should be mortgaged towards the gift, even if there's a problem. Like, for example, if they find that the wine is all vinegar, then the inheritors can't say, well, he gave you wine, and here's your wine. Here's what's left of the wine. Because it's not even worth 400 zuz now at all. He wants to make sure, no, everything is responsible to get him that 400 zuz, and therefore he didn't just say give him wine. And he didn't just say sell it and give him the wine, because what happens if you sell it, and then he didn't just say sell him and give him the money, because then what happens if you sell it and then the money gets lost? Then he would lose what he gets. So therefore he said, give him 400 zuz from the wine, that he's responsible for 400 zuz. You should take it from the wine. If you can't take it from the wine, then you take it from somewhere else. So Zimara, a message was sent from there that is actually what happened here. That is the halacha, that he was just giving him more rights. Now we get the next Mishnah, which is very short, contains one halacha. If somebody is in the bottom of a pit, a well or something, and he can't escape, and then he calls out, whoever hears his voice, meaning whoever hears my voice, should write a get for my wife, and he specifies his name and the name of the city in which he lives, so that we're able to do that. Then the halacha is we should write the get and give it, even though he didn't say give, but that's obviously what he meant, write and give the get. So the Gemara asks, okay, as far as the halachas of Gittin, we're good, but how do we know that he is who he says he is? First of all, the Gemara says maybe he's a shade. Maybe he's a spiritual force from the side of evil, which is trying to mess up this person and his wife. So Gemara says, Rabbi Yehuda says we see that he has a human form. So Gemara says they can also take human form. Gemara says we said he has a shadow. So Gemara says a shade can also have a shadow. Gemara says he has a shadow of the shadow, which is a smaller, lighter, slighter shadow that you sometimes find near another shadow. Those only humans and normal objects can have that. Shadim don't have that. The Gemara says that Rav Chanina says that he learned that from Rav Yonasan. So the Gemara asks, but maybe it's a tzara, meaning maybe it's a person who hates this man's wife, like another co-wife, and is trying to mess her up. So the Gemara just says, we learned in Tana de Rabbi Shmuel, during a time of danger where the person is close to death, we write and we give it even though we don't fully recognize the person. We work with the trust that he is who he says he is, and we ignore the small possibility that it's someone else. Now we get our next Mishnah, which discusses a perfectly healthy person who says, write a get for my wife, and we'll see what happens if he dies. So the Mishnah says, you don't do it, he didn't say give, and you assume that the only reason that he said to write a get is because he wants to torment his wife. Now the Mishnah brings an incident that happened. There was a healthy person who said, write a get for my wife, and then he went up on the roof, and he fell off, and he died. So the question was, and obviously it's too late to give the get now, but had we given the get already, is it valid under this halacha? So when it says Rav Shimon ben Gamliel paskin that if he jumped off, then it is a good get. And the reasoning is because he knew that he was about to die, and that's the same halacha applies. That's why he said write it, and didn't say to give it. If, however, he fell off by accident, then he didn't know any of that. He didn't know that was about to happen, and therefore the get is not valid. Somewhere asks that this contradicts the previous halacha. Usually when you bring a story, it demonstrates the previous halacha. Here, the halacha was that you should not give, and we're bringing a story in which Rosh Hashanah says you should give. Where it says you can fill in here something as if it's missing, and that if what ended up happening shows that he was about to die and he knew it, then you can give it. And then you have the story about the guy who fell off the roof, and Rav Shmuel said if he jumped and so he knew he was about to die, then you should actually go ahead and give the get. Now the Gemara brings a story. There was a guy who went into a shul and he found a Chumash Rebbe, and he was sitting with his son and someone else. So he had three people there, and he said, 2 out of you 3 write a get for my wife. And then he left and he traveled to Medina Sayyab. But so you would have 2 of these 3 would have to be the third person as well as the father or the son. Now, obviously, you would initially choose the father, but then the father got sick. So the question is, would we say that he intended for the son to be part of the shlichus as well, if the father is not available? Is it possible that a person appoints a son as a shliach if his father is sitting right there? Usually you appoint the father, not the son. Nimar says it's a machlekes. Rav Nachman says no. Rav Papi says yes. Rava says the halacha is yes. We now get to our next Mishnah, and this Mishnah is discussing the halacha as to when somebody appoints people to give a get for his wife, to write and to give, or one or the other. Do they have to do it themselves, or can they make other people do it? And the Gemara says it depends on whether he specifically ordered them to write it, or he just said to them to give it. If he ordered them to write it, then he wants them to write it. It also depends if he made them into a beis din, or if he made them into messengers to actually give it. If he made them into a beis din, they can order others. If he just told them to do it, they can't order others. So the Mishnah brings the cases therefore as follows. So if he says to 2 people, give get to my wife, even though he didn't specify write it, they have to write it and give it themselves because they're not a beis din. They're not authorized to have anybody else do anything, and therefore they have to write it themselves and go ahead and give it, even though he just said to give the get. Now, if he said to 3 people, then it depends. So then if he says write and give, then they have to write and give, because he ordered them specifically to write and give. If he just said to give, then they can have someone else write and give, because they are the beis din, they are empowered to have other people do that. This is all Rabbi Meir's shita. Also, the Mishnah says, Rabbi Chanina, the person from Ono, says that he brought this halacha out of the prison, meaning he heard it from Rabbi Akiva, who was locked in a Roman cell for teaching Torah, and he taught him this halacha. Now, Rabbi Yossi disagrees on this last one, and he says that I told the shliach, meaning I told Rabbi Chanina, we told Rabbi Chanina, that we have a Kabbalah that even if he says to the beis din, Gadol Yerushalayim, give a get to my wife, they have to write and give themselves. Even though it's a beis din, it doesn't matter. If he said to give it, they have to write it and give themselves. They can't authorize other people to do it. Now, the Mishnah brings another halacha, which is if somebody says to 10 people, write the get and give it. Here the issue is not the write and give. Here's the issue is the 10. The halacha is if he just said to them, you write and give, then one person writes, 2 people sign. If, however, he said all of you, then they all have to sign. One again writes, of course. You don't need more than one to write, but they all have to sign on it. And if one of them dies, the get cannot be given because he cannot sign anymore. And now again, the Gemara, which introduces a shaila, which the Gemara is going to want to try to resolve from our Mishnah. So Rav Yirmiyah bar Abba says that they sent a question from Beirav to Shmuel. Yelamdeinu Rabbeinu, please teach us the halacha. If somebody says to 2 people, write and give a get to my wife, and then they went and they hired a sefer to write it, and they signed it themselves, what's the halacha? So the Gemara says that he said it's a suffix, he sent back it's a suffix. If she got remarried based on that get, she has to get divorced, and we have to look into it. So the Gemara says, what's the question here? What seems to be the issue? So the Gemara is going to try a few possibilities to explain what the question is. The Gemara first wants to say, we have a case of a shliach making another shliach. The husband told these 2 people to do it, and they went and hired someone else to be a slaver to write it. So normally a shliach can make a shliach if he's giving over an object, like a get to deliver, he can pass the get along. However, here it's just instructions. As the shaila we've seen, are instructions transferable? Can he, if the shliach, if all he has is instructions from the husband, can he give over those instructions to someone else to do or not? So the Gemara says that can't be the question because Shmuel already said in the name of Rabbi that the halacha is like Rabbi Yossi, who says that you cannot give over instructions, and therefore you should not be able to do this. Now the Gemara is going to explain how that issue is resolved. Whatever the question is, how did you get around the fact that it's just instructions? So the Gemara says no. So the question therefore is as follows: in our Mishnah, where it says write the get, where we said in our Mishnah clearly that if he says write the get, or he's talking to only two people, they have to write it themselves. So here in this case, it's both of those. It's only two people, and he said write. So the question is, what does writing mean? Writing means actually writing the get, or writing means just signing the get. He just wants them to be the witnesses to sign on it. So the Gemara says, well, let's resolve it from the Mishnah. It says there clearly that if somebody says give a get to my wife, or to three people write and give the get, then they have to write and give it themselves. So you see clearly that if he says write it, or if he says to two, then they have to give it. Here you have both. The Gemara says we just said that that's exactly the question. Do you have to actually write it, or is it enough to hire someone else to write it and they just have to sign it? So that's exactly the shaila. So the Gemara says no. We mean to say proof from Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi says in the end of the Mishnah that we know that even if the Beis Din Gadol in Yerushalayim was appointed to do this, they have to actually learn how to write. It says if they don't know how to write, they have to learn how to write, and they have to give it themselves. So, and they have to write it and give it themselves. Now, if writing just means sign, what do you mean they have to learn how to write? Every Beis Din knows how to sign their name. They have to sign many things. Maybe they don't know how to write like a cipher. Fine, but that makes sense. But obviously, then the Mishnah is referring to writing the body of the get. It's not referring to just signing it. Or says no, it could be referring to a Beis Din that just became appointed. They didn't sign anything yet. They didn't learn how to sign, so they have to go learn how to sign. So maybe still the Mishnah is referring to signing and not the actual writing the body of the get. We want to ask on the possibility that they only have to sign. So that means that anybody